Welcome everybody to the live stream, all-time Crafting Trust Premium members that are watching this live as it happens. Thank you so much for being here. Let me know where you're joining us from in the chat. That way we can figure out what part of the world you're from, what you'd like to ask Jeff Patterson, who's going to be joining me in just a moment, and so on and so forth. Now, remember, if you want to listen to the finished, polished version of this podcast episode, of course, you have a free access to the ad-free version, rather, of the show when it comes out. And this episode will be coming out sometime, I believe, in November. And so when that comes out, you'll be able to listen to the audio version as well as, listen to it on YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts, and you won't have any of the advertisements going with it. For those of you that are not watching this live, this is the kind of the raw, unedited version of an episode that will be produced, which you can get wherever you get your podcasts. So we got Gloria Jean joining us. Thank you so much. I'll be bringing Jeff in here in just a minute. Again, the book is called The Yielding Warrior by Jeff Patterson, Discovering the Secret Path to Unleashing Your True Potential. I've been excited to have Jeff join me for a while since I had the chance to check out the book. I got a series of questions, but you know how these things go. We kind of go organically. One question could lead to four others. So if you've got questions and you want to share them with us as we go through our conversation today, please put them in the chat, and they may make the final episode of the podcast. So without further ado, let me bring in Jeff Patterson. Jeff, thank you so much for joining me here today on A Productive Conversation on the live stream for our premium members of our community.
Hey, thank you for having me.
So Jeff, before we get started, let's basically just to give you a sense of what we're doing here is this entire week, and for those that are subscribed to the channel and that are premium members, they know this. We are doing a slew of live streams this week just to kick off podcast season. It's the time of year where things are getting back into the swing of things. So the premium members of our community have access to a variety of benefits. And checking out and being able to be part of this podcast is just one of them. So I appreciate you being here. And the nice thing about you being here in the same time zone is that I think we had a previous guest, Dave, who was on yesterday. He was in Amsterdam. So the time of day for him was like it's almost time for bed. For you, it's, same time. So are you more of a night owl, or are you more of an early riser, or do you find yourself somewhere in the middle?
Kind of in the middle. I get up pretty early, but I also usually am not in bed before 11.
There you go. So diurnal, like as most circadian rhythm scientists would say, kind of somewhere in the middle. So I'm going to hit record here on my Rodecaster Pro in a second, but you have a job once I hit record, and I'll signal you as to when to get started. So before every episode, by the way, Janet, thanks for joining us today, and Ksenia is here as well. Sarah is also here. Sarah's my operations coordinator, so she will be facilitating the chat. Your job, Jeff, is to say the following once I count you in. It's, hi, state your name, and I'm about to have a productive conversation with Mike Vardy. And then we just go into it. I do the intro and outro where your bio and all that stuff comes out and what we talked about. Separate, I'm sure this is not your first rodeo doing a podcast, so that stuff tends to happen behind the scenes. And then we'll go into a 30-minute conversation or so. So again, the line that you have to introduce yourself is, hi, state your name, and I'm about to have a productive conversation with Mike Vardy. So I'm going to hit the record button here, and I'll count you in. You good to go, Jeff? Ready to go?
I'm ready when you are, sir.
Perfect. Here we go. Ready? 3, 2, 1, go.
Hello, I'm Jeff Patterson, and I'm looking forward to having a productive conversation here with Mike Vardy. Thanks for having me.
Jeff, thanks so much for joining me, not only on the podcast, but for premium members live on YouTube. This episode is happening over a slew of other episodes that we're doing to kick off what is my year, which is September. That's the beginning of my year. So I really appreciate you joining me here today on the program.
Nice. Thanks for having me again. Yeah, I've been looking forward to it.
So, Jeff, the book that I'm holding in my hands via the Kindle is The Yielding Warrior, Discovering the Secret Path to Unleashing Your True Potential. And right out of the gate, I want to talk about that term yield, because when it comes to being productive and managing your relationship with time, when people hear the word pause or slow or measured or mindful, it creates, for some it's like a sigh of relief, but for others it creates anxiety because it seems counter or paradoxical to the idea of being productive. The term yielding and yield in particular, you go into it in great detail at the beginning of the book. What power exists in this concept of yielding that you've explored it and believe would help people in terms of actually harnessing their productivity in a much more intentional or even better way?
The great thing about yielding is it can be applied to any area of your life. And one of the things that I commonly hear from many people is that yielding, I don't want to do that. I'm giving up. It feels like I'm being weak. And it has nothing to do with being weak or not putting your effort forward. The idea of yielding, I break it down into three categories. We have physical yielding, mental yielding, and emotional yielding. And I'll briefly kind of describe what those are. So physical yielding is the idea that I push you, you push me, whoever's the bigger, stronger person with the most leverage eventually is going to push the other person over. But with yielding, instead of us trying to see who the bigger meathead is, when you push me, I get out of the way of that force. And now I can respond with less effort. So I'm not trying to butt heads with you and see if I'm bigger and stronger than you. Now, it's obvious how this is beneficial in any kind of athletics because it's very common in any sport that you're going to come up against other athletes that are bigger and stronger than you. And so you need to learn how to get where you need to go with the least amount of resistance so you can overcome some of these bigger, stronger people. Now, in order to be good at physical yielding, a lot of things have to come into play. You need to be well rooted. The lower part of your body needs to be strong and flexible so you can change your central equilibrium without getting tight. The body has to be relaxed. The breath has to be calm and the mind has to be present. Now, while it may be a lifetime to really master this skill, the cool thing about it is from day one, by integrating the meditative arts into your life and learning to expand this awareness, not only do we see these things more clearly inside of ourselves, but we also start to see these things more clearly in other people. And this is where we move into what I call mental yielding, which is the second pillar. Now, say, for example, we're having a conversation and I say something that unsettles you, and I pick up on it from that first change in energy that you're giving me, no matter what it is. Maybe it's something as subtle as just a change in your breathing. It's a lot easier at this point to adjust the conversation to keep us in a happy place than if I'm not paying attention to that. And pretty soon I'm so far off track, you want to slap me upside the head. And so learning how to use yielding in all of your interactions is extremely powerful. One, you're just being more considerate, which is something we should all do anyway. And two, it allows you to be strategic so you can guide any conversation towards a positive outcome with the least amount of resistance. And this is great, obviously, for your relationships, for business, for sales, for negotiations. I mean, there's so many different ways that you can apply this concept. Then the third pillar of yielding is what I call emotional yielding. And emotional yielding is very much like mental yielding, but it's with your own interpersonal conflicts. So you think about when something happens to us, oftentimes we'll respond and we'll go down this path. And we might get an hour a day, a week down that road and realize maybe that wasn't the best choice. But by adapting the meditative arts into our life and enhancing that awareness and being more present, when these things happen to us, it allows us to evaluate the situation and be a little bit more centered in our decision-making process. And oftentimes it can save us a lot of heartache on the other side. And I've been explaining this idea of yielding for many years. I've been running my academy here now for 30 years here in Portland. And one of the most common things I'll hear people say is, that makes a lot of sense. I use yielding all the time. And while I would agree, I think everybody does some degree of yielding all the time. It's kind of like if you or I were to walk into a crime scene with a detective who's been on the job for 30 years, I guarantee you that person would see things about the series of events and the timeline that I know at least I would have no clue of. And yielding helps us see things inside of ourselves and inside of other people that I truly believe you will never have any clue of unless you adapt the meditative arts into your life.
Why do you think so many people have a hard time slowing down and actually kind of integrating these kind of things into the idea of again, yielding, which as it caught me right out of the gate. First off, the title of the book, I'm like, oh, yield. Like, because you hear the term pause. And by the way, we're going to get to the idea of responsiveness versus reactiveness too, because I think that's a key element here. But why do you think it's such a challenge, maybe even a struggle for some to recognize not only the importance and the value of yielding, but just to integrate it into their lives?
The meditative arts is difficult for people because the way society is right now doesn't really correlate too well with this mindset. You know, we're so busy, we've got a cell phone in our hand 24/7, and we've got all of these distractions that are going on every day. And it forces us to kind of be scattered with our thoughts. And what happens is we get so used to all of these distractions and being out in the busy world, and basically we have these walls up around us all the time. And I often talk about it as, you know, we're wearing these masks because maybe we don't want to show people exactly how we really feel, or we don't want to hurt somebody's feelings and tell them the truth, or whatever it is. And by wearing these masks all the time and putting up these barriers to protect ourselves, a lot of times what happens is we go to look at ourselves in the mirror and we're still wearing these masks. And the meditative arts is one of those things that helps us put these masks away and really stay truly connected to who we are. And because we've spent our whole life living this kind of fast-paced rhythm, it takes some serious thought and effort to learn how to slow down and stay connected to who we truly are. And, you know, I've been teaching the meditative arts for 30 years, and the people that listen and they learn how to integrate this stuff in their life, they'll do it for the rest of their life because they'll see so many benefits and realize what it means to really stay truly connected to who they are. That, you know, it's kind of sad, but a lot of times in today's society, people are missing out on that, you know. And the Dalai Lama once said something that I've repeated 100 times over and I really enjoy, is that he said, you know, everybody should meditate for 20 minutes a day. Unless you're too busy, then you should meditate for an hour. And I love that because it really talks about, you know, the value of just staying connected to who you are.
I want to circle back to the idea of the internal versus the external, which you talk about here in the book. I think it's, let's go back to, as I'm looking through it, it's the idea of, oh, here we go, chapter, one of the earlier chapters where it's, you know, the internal battles are the ones that kind of cause us the most, they cause us the most acrimony when it comes to like the resistance to yielding, right? Like the resistance to change, the resistance to being responsive as opposed to reactive. You mentioned right off the top the physical, like let's get out of the way, so, and then choose how to respond as opposed to being reactive. And I wonder if it's that the hard part is the facing the inner self versus like what's going on in the external world. The external world certainly has ways of stealing things like attention, quality of our efforts, the ability to respond rather than react. But internally, what can we do to alleviate some of the battles that are happening inside of us that will, you know, and that the reflective practices and these meditative, you know, kind of the meditative practices that we're touching on here can help us kind of not push through, but you know, just live in a way that is more harmonious, for lack of a better term.
You know, we have, you know, I've heard anywhere between 70 and 90,000 thoughts a day. And of those thoughts that we have every day, I have also read that 90% of them are the same thoughts that we had the day before and the day before and the day before that.
Right.
And when you are resistant to this change, that means that you're comfortable and everything is the way it is for you, and you don't want to kind of get to that other side, and oftentimes what I've found is with people that are successful in the meditative arts
Mm-hmm.
are the ones that have a health problem, or they have a real strong reason they want to stay healthy to watch their grandkids grow up, or maybe they're dealing with stress and anxiety and they have panic attacks, or maybe it's an athlete who really wants to improve their performance on the field. And if you have a strong why that's kind of pointing you in that direction, that's going to help give you a reason to stay consistent, which is the key in any meditation practice. And so anytime somebody new comes to the practice, I always have them sit down and think about why are they being drawn to the practice, and really kind of make a strong list of reasons. Because I don't care who you are, tomorrow, next week, next month, there's going to be a day when that alarm goes off and you're not going to want to get up and do your meditation. You're going to say, I'll do it tomorrow. And this is meant to be a way of life and a way that we live, not a hobby that we do once in a while.
Right.
And when you can integrate the meditative arts into your lifestyle, and I break down the meditation practices into ritual practices, active practices, and philosophical practices. A ritual practice is where you set that 20 minutes aside every day, or whatever that is for you. And then active practices are things that you can do all day, every day, when you're walking down the street, standing in line at the grocery store. These are great ways to keep that present state of mind, and they're easy to do. It doesn't mean that you need to retire to a cave and go meditate for the rest of your life. But if you just do a little bit all day, every day, now we start to stay more present and more in tune. And that's where we really reap the benefits of the practice. And if you can do that, then we start to build a life practice around the meditative arts, which is where all the true value from it really starts to come out.
Not too long ago, and I'll link to this episode in the show notes, I interviewed Yamato, who is in Boston and has Boabom as his practice. So he brings in the idea of physical, and there's a meditative component to it as well. You mentioned earlier that we live in a world that is conspires isn't the right word. I'm going to use it anyway because it's just the first word that came to mind. Maybe it's because of how I somewhat feel. To keep us from being mindful, to keep us from, like, it's all about go fast now. If you're not moving forward, then you're not keeping up, you're not progressing. You talk about in the book the idea of Tai Chi, Qigong. My wife's an acupuncturist, so I am familiar with some of the elements of Qi and so on and so forth. But I find more now than in recent years, and maybe it's because of COVID-19 and the pandemic that may have brought this forth a bit more. But there seems to be more of, just as I said, there's a resistance to it. There's also more of an acceptance or a willingness to go down this path a bit more. How do you help someone that feels that pull of, I need to have the practice in the meditative arts. I need to, and I know that it's going to be helpful, but I also am so new to it, and the barrier to entry to me seems so vast that, they hear that story about the Buddha, meditate for 20 minutes. If you're busy, meditate for an hour. It's akin to the people who say, I know I need to do a weekly review to David Allen's Getting Things Done. And he says, yeah, your first review is going to take you 8 hours. And they go, I'm out, because they don't feel that they can sit for 8 hours to go through the review. And yet if they spend that 8 hours, everything going forward would be better for them, because it's just that 8 hour block or whatever it is. How do you help somebody kind of break past that bias, for lack of a better term?
Well, there's three things that I always try to get a beginner meditator to contemplate and spend some time thinking about when taking on the practice. And the first one we kind of already touched on was to find a strong why.
Right.
If you have some reasons that are drawing you there, that's going to give you the energy and the motivation. And the second thing is to talk about the importance of consistency, because developing consistency and making it a habit, now it starts to become in your rhythm and a way of life. And through consistency, we develop discipline, integrity, perseverance. And when we start developing these qualities in our practice, they feed over into every area of life and our relationships, our work, our hobbies. And so I try to get people to see these benefits of the practice from the beginning. So they have more of a reason, more of a kind of a backing to kind of push them through those difficult days when they feel like they don't want to do it. And then thirdly, one of the most important things is you want to find a guide. If there's a million videos out there on YouTube, and there's all these apps and different things that you could do and go look at. And if you don't have somebody pointing you in the right direction, you could waste 15 years of your life doing things that don't really fit what you're looking to do. In the
Right.
meditative arts, there's 5 different directions of the practice. There's what I call the athletic side of the training that helps your performance and physical ability. There's the therapeutic side, the medical side, the philosophical side, and also the meditative or spiritual side. And so not everybody follows the same practices. And having a guide, one, will help you fine tune and point you in the right direction, but show you how to build an evolving life practice around the meditative arts so you can get there a lot quicker. I often tell people it's kind of like, if I was to take you to a basketball court and you never watched a game of basketball, you don't know you're supposed to dribble the ball, you don't even know the ball's supposed to go in the hoop. And then I say, go play basketball, you're going to be horrible. But if I take you to that court and I say, here's a world-class coach, go work with this person for 6 months, you could get pretty good in 6 months. And I've literally seen people come into the academy through the years that have been training and doing the meditation practice for 15 years. And they'll come in here and see somebody that's only been here 6 or 12 months that's further along in their practice, and they'll get frustrated because they've spent all this time. And the reason is they had no direction. They didn't know how to put things together. And so, life is short. Your time is valuable, which we've already talked about. Having somebody in your corner to help you and point you on the shortest path will really help you reach those goals quicker. And that will help give you the motivation and the desire to keep going and really see all the benefits from adapting the practice.
That actually is a perfect dovetail into the question that we're getting from Jordan from the community here. I'm going to put it up on the screen here. It might be hard to read
Yeah.
on the actual video itself, but that's okay. I can read it out.
Okay.
So can one learn the actual how to meditate from a book? So Jordan's interested in starting to meditate. And this is alluding to what you talked about, the idea of, finding someone, and there's so many different options out there, so many different ways. And he's even said, like, it seems to be endless options. And then it turns into decision fatigue. So then what happens is you just don't start. You get caught in this decision loop or this lack of making choices. He's using, for example, John Kabat-Zinn's masterclass as an example of one. But there's lots out there. So how, I'd love to hear your thoughts on like the instructive aspect of reading about it and getting things from a book, as opposed to, okay, there's lots out there and I can see a lot. How do I avoid that decision fatigue of just getting into it, as opposed to exploring? Again, it's the equivalent of like doing it, like kind of the activity of looking for it, as opposed to the actual activity of doing it.
Yes, that's a great question. And I deal with that all the time with people coming to the academy and to my online program. And that I'm all for reading. I love to read. I read at least a book a week. I'm pretty into that. And I think there's a lot of great tips and things that we can do to help escalate our learning with the practice. But you need to have somebody helping you, because you could pick up a book that's focuses on the medical direction of the practice, or the spiritual direction of the practice, or the therapeutic direction, and you're wanting to look and learn things for the athletic development of the practice, and you're not going to know what ritual practices, what active practices, what philosophical practices are going to help point me in that direction on the shortest path to get there. And somebody that's been in the practice for a number of years and really kind of lives the lifestyle and understands it, they're going to be able to help save you so much time and energy and a lot of confusion and frustration, because you might be reading a book that has no it has no way to help you get down the path that you want to get down. And so, there's a lot of programs out there. There's a lot of good teachers. I would talk to somebody and kind of get a good feel of what you think of their philosophy and kind of how they build the practice, and really think about how you can integrate the lifestyle rather than listening to an app or reading a book and thinking that that's going to be the foundation of your practice.
Before we get to, I want to dive into some of this. For example, in the appendix, you talk about the 5-element phase theory and how yielding works alongside it. We're going to touch on that in a minute. But as I was going through the book, and as I kept thinking about yielding, and yield in particular, where do we hear the term yield more often than not when it comes to driving, right? Like the idea of yield. That's a sign that we see all the time, the triangular thing and so on and so forth. And I couldn't help but think, and I got this from reading it, and I'd love to hear your further thoughts on this, but yielding isn't, to me, it felt like it's not just about the pause. It's about, and the relationship to like driving I'm going to bring up here, but it's give and take, right? Like the idea of there is this, so when someone yields, there has to be some trust there that someone A is going to yield because if they don't, you know what I mean? Like when you're driving, if they don't yield, then things kind of fall apart. But it's almost, in some respects, like a merge on a highway. We hear about them here up in British Columbia. I think this also, I don't know if you hear about this too much in your part of the world, but there's always this zipper merge argument, right? Which is like, when should you actually merge into a lane? And some people are like, I'm going to merge before. But then the way a zipper merge technically works is you should drive up until the end of that lane, and then everyone should kind of let you in. It should be one car, then another car, then the car that's in that lane goes. So again, it becomes this give and take thing. Do you feel that, I'd like to hear and if I'm off base on this in terms of what your thoughts are on it, I'd love to hear that as well. But to me, it feels like the idea of yielding does have some elements of give and take, both in the external world as well as the internal world, right?
For sure. And with yielding, part of the reason why it's used so much in the meditative arts is because we have to develop a higher level of sensitivity and awareness. So we're not just giving way. Oftentimes we're redirecting and guiding it to a positive outcome with the least amount of resistance. And the idea of yielding, if you study military history, it's been used in conflict and battles for generations through time. And so it's not just about like giving way and letting them come over in your lane, which is an idea and kind of one way that you could look at the word yielding. But when I talk about yielding, I talk about the strategy behind it.
Right.
How can I recognize what is changing the energy in the person that I'm talking to, and see where it's taking them a little off center on the kind of excited side, and a little off center on the not interested side, and how can I find that middle path to guide them where I want to go with the least amount of resistance? So it's very strategic. And in the combat arts, it is as well, because it's not just about giving way and letting somebody push you over and throw you on your back.
Right.
It's about recognizing that first movement that they come at you with, and rather than trying to stop it, engage with it, and then redirect it down a path that takes a lot less resistance than trying to meet it heads on. So it's a very strategic concept, and it takes a lot of sensitivity and awareness to be good at it.
And this goes back to the responsiveness versus the reactiveness, I think, right? That distinction between those two terms, right? Which I don't think, again, I'm being general there, I don't think a lot of people give that distinction enough merit or enough thought. They think about proactive and reactive, but responsiveness somehow gets missed along the way.
Yes, I agree. And in martial arts, there's a big difference between reacting and responding. If you can respond, you're relaxed and you can move things and you can take it into that positive direction. But when you react, you're like, you get stiff, and a lot of times you can't be present in the moment when you're reacting to everything, because it's hard for you to see everything that's going on. But when you can just respond and feel it coming in, it's a lot easier to to guide it. I don't know if you've ever watched any fighting, or a good boxer, or a good jujitsu player, but when you watch them do their moves, and oftentimes it looks effortless, like, oh, he just slipped that punch, and I was like, how did he do that? He didn't wait till that punch was coming in to start moving. He felt it. He noticed that change in energy and that person shifting his weight subtly to that other foot, and he could feel that punch coming in before it ever even got there. Because if he waits till he sees the punch, he's already getting hit.
Mm-hmm.
And so learning how to respond and feel that by that heightened sensitivity is a huge difference.
Well, and it goes back to the driving metaphor. Like, if you're looking further enough down the road and have awareness around yourself, you'll be able to respond to what's going on, as opposed to, something happens really quickly and you have to react. And I mean, again, if you get in an accident, when you react, you're tensed up. That's where that's where people, it's like, again, going back to my wife, she notices that, yeah, so, you may not notice the injury right away because you got really tense and the adrenaline and all that score, but then all of a sudden, like, ow, my neck, my this, my that, because you weren't like chill, and therefore that tension kind of caused that injury to be more severe, for lack of a better term, than not, right? Attention is key here too. Pace is part, the idea of, to me, just like retreating, and you brought up like combat and so on and so forth, like what we do when we hear the term retreat, it has two meanings. Number one is to take a step back and take stock and like, I'm going on a retreat. I'm going to get away from what's going on in the world and just have, time to myself, versus a retreat in combat or whatever, where it's like, I'm going to take a step back because I'm clearly outnumbered and my tactics aren't working. Something's happened along the way. Yielding sounds like there are elements of that too. There's those double-edged meanings, right? Where it's, I'm going to take a step back, like you said, adjust my tactics and be more responsive than reactive. Why did you call the book The Yielding Warrior? Is that because what's the warrior aspect here that I want people to get out of this? And I'm sure you do as well.
So the warrior aspect is learning the strategy behind it. And it doesn't always mean battle. However, in the combat sports, it obviously does.
Mm-hmm.
But when you can understand the strategy, now you're like a warrior. Because if you're leading a battalion of troops and your only strategy is to punch through the line, it's only going to take a moment before you get somebody sharp that's going to flank you from the sides, and now you're in trouble and you're going to lose. And so understanding how to develop the strategy, it's just like playing chess. If everything you do, you just move all your pieces forward, you're going to get wiped out. You got to understand the strategy and see the development and understand the play and the whole game and everything that's going on. And that's why I've always been so passionate about this idea, because, I've been studying for 36 years and I'm still just a student. I've traveled around the world many times and learned from some amazing meditation practitioners. And I'm learning as much now as I did 20 years ago. It really is a deep practice, and that's what keeps it inspiring and fun.
If somebody wants to get started with the meditative arts, we already alluded to the story of the 20 minutes versus the hour, which can put people in like, nope, can't do it. Nice story, bro, but no thanks kind of thing. How does someone start in a way, if they wanted to start after listening to this episode right now, other than obviously picking up the book, and we'll circle back to that to kind of give you some of the back, kind of the story behind it and why, why it matters to do this. What's one quick win that somebody can get today after listening to this episode and this conversation to get them started down that path?
So one thing that you could do, which is really simple, is start integrating some active practices. And one simple active practice, which is great for your awareness and kind of helping you be more in tune throughout the day, is set an alarm to go off on your phone every 60 or 90 minutes. And every time it goes off, just pause from whatever you're doing and count out 10 simple breaths. deep, full breaths, belly breaths, breathe in, bring your awareness, just try to pay attention to whatever's going on and settle yourself. And you start doing that, and you'll notice that you start to relax a little bit. You start to be a little bit more present. It's a simple thing. It's easy. Anybody can do it. 10 breaths maybe takes 2 minutes if you breathe really slow. It's not like a huge commitment, and you'll see some great positive change just from that one little trick.
I want to talk about the elements that we touched on as our last thing before we wrap up today. So the 5 element and phase theory in yielding. First off, and note this is near the end of the book, and it caught my attention because there's a framework there that shows up like literally right out of the gate. Can you kind of touch on that for those that are not familiar with the 5 element / phase theory in yielding, and why did you put that at that part of the book as opposed to kind of maybe integrating it? Although you do touch on it in the book leading up to that point, but with that, rather than integrating it as like a key, like a chapter, like this is the chapter of the book as opposed to the appendix.
A concept that needs a book or two all by itself.
Right.
And so I wanted to introduce people to that idea and let them see that, hey, this is part of the philosophical development behind the meditative arts. And I kind of, when I talk about the meditative arts, I kind of have these foundational principles that I teach people, and I call them the 5 regulations. And it's regulating the body, regulating the breath, regulating the mind, regulating the energy, and regulating the spirit. And real briefly, I'll kind of talk about what those are.
Sure.
When we talk about regulating the body, it's the idea that, think about a time when you're sitting down at your computer and you've been there for 3 or 4 hours, your shoulders are rounded forward, you start feeling lethargic, maybe your neck's getting stiff, you're feeling just kind of a little bit off. And then another time when the most important person in your world walks in the room and your body perks up and you're feeling like you're on top of the world. Well, we are in control of those 2 energies 100% of the time, every day. And so as we start developing a practice, regulating the body and learning how to adjust our skeletal alignment and our muscular tension through the day and through our movements and our practices, this is a huge first step and can adjust our physical, mental, and emotional states through the day. The next phase is regulating the breath. And regulating the breath is a very deep topic and something that you'll study for the rest of your life if you get into the meditative practices. And oftentimes Qigong is referred to as the science of the breath because there's literally hundreds of different breathing strategies. Now, once you start understanding how to use these strategies, we can use them to get different outcomes. And because there's so many, I kind of broadly break them down into yin methods and yang methods. An example of a yin breath would be if you ever listen to somebody breathing when they're sleeping, their natural instinct is to do longer inhales and shorter exhales. And this is the body's natural way of bringing your conscious mind into your subconscious mind, which is where we are when we're sleeping and dreaming. So if we want to emulate this style of breath, we could do longer inhales in our meditation, soft retentions at the end of the inhale. This helps bring our energy inward, which is great for stress reduction, for anxiety, for panic attacks, for focus, and many other things. Then we have the yang side of the breath, which is more aggressive. It's kind of like if you ever had to push your car, you pick up something heavy, your natural instinct is to put tension in the breath, make it audible, exhale to kind of generate that power. Now, when you start understanding how to use this as a tool, we can use the breath to adjust our outcomes. And in Chinese philosophy, they call this balancing the kan and li. Now, we all go through the day with emotional ups and downs. Some people are like a roller coaster, others may be a little more balanced. But when you start seeing yourself get excited, we can use the yin breath to help bring us back down. And we start seeing ourselves feel depleted. We can use the yang breath to help bring us back up. And now we can be more stable and more centered throughout the day. Then the next regulation is regulating the mind. And again, this is a lifelong practice. And we touched on it a little bit with talking about distraction earlier. Mm-hmm. Well, one of the most common things I hear people say with meditation is, I tried that, but it just didn't work for me. I couldn't quiet my mind. Somewhere along the way, people got this misconception that in order to be successful at meditation, we have to be in this state of nirvana and quiet the mind and be peaceful and blissful and all this other stuff. And it couldn't be further from the truth. I've trained with some amazing people that are meditation masters from around the world, and I've never once met anybody that doesn't get distracted. We all do, it's just part of life. And with meditation, the great thing about this is when you're sitting or maybe you're doing a movement practice or whatever it is, if you get distracted 50 times during this 20-minute session, every time you get distracted, you recognize the imbalance, you use your practice, the movement, the breath, the structure to bring yourself back to center. And you just got 50 repetitions of how to be out of balance and off center and coming back to a balanced, focused state. Now, you do this every day, every month, every year, you start to become unshakable. And pretty soon, nobody could say anything. A stressful day can't throw you off your game. All of these things help you be more balanced and respond from a peaceful state of mind, which is huge. There's this story that I love about these two old monks, and they're walking down this dirt road after a huge rainstorm. And they come up to this huge mud puddle, and on the other side of the puddle is this beautiful little girl standing there in a white dress, and she's crying. And the older monk yells across the puddle and says, "Is everything okay? Can we help you?" And she says, "I need to be somewhere, but if I walk across this puddle, I'm going to get my dress all dirty." And so he rolls up his pant legs, he walks across the puddle, he picks her up, puts her on his back, takes her to the other side, and she's off on her way. Well, him and the younger monk are walking a couple miles down the road, and finally the younger monk is just furious, and he says, we're not supposed to touch girls, but you did back there at the puddle." And he looks at him and he says, "You're still thinking about that girl? I left her back there at the puddle." And how many times in life do we get 2 miles down the muddy road before we even realize that something's taken us off center? Well, the meditative arts helps us regulate this and see these imbalances so we can make these adjustments before we get 2 miles down the road. And then the fourth regulation is regulating the energy. And we could literally talk about this for hours, but just a brief idea of it is when we learn how to reach a competent level in regulating the body, the breath, and the mind, we have the skill sets to make adjustments and guide the energy in the body through different circulations, leading it inward, leading it outward, which is very effective for different meditations and different outcomes that we want to achieve. And then lastly, we have regulating the spirit, which a lot of meditation practitioners will spend their entire life working towards that ultimate stage of enlightenment. And through these 5 fundamental foundations, this is like kind of the core fundamental in any meditation practice, whether you're doing sitting meditation, Tai Chi, Qigong, yoga, breath work, it doesn't matter what you're doing. You have to cultivate these 5 regulations in order to build an evolving practice.
Jeff, last question before I let you go. And it comes from it's not Gloria Jean brings this up in the chat. She's a member of the community, but we touched on the idea that the world is actually providing more like options for reflective practices like journaling. We're seeing it built into the devices a bit more, so on and so forth. I touched on this with Dave from Reflection in a previous episode where we touched on the idea of, hey, journaling is the barrier to entry to journaling is so much lower now than it was before. It's now, the only thing getting on our way, frankly, is us. What are your thoughts on, number one, the apps that are out there to assist with meditation? And back to Jordan's point, there are a lot of them. And not only are there a lot of those apps, there is a lot going on in each of them, whether it's Calm, whether it's Headspace, whether it's even Sam Harris's Waking Up app. There's a lot going on inside of them that, frankly, for some could be a distraction in and of themselves. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on those apps, because I think that they offer a gateway and even a means to build that practice. But by the same token, they also are trying to say, hey, here are all the things that you could do. And it puts people in a state of, it could put some people in a state of like, well, I don't, I'm stuck, right? Because I'm stuck with decision fatigue all over again.
So I'm glad you asked that question, because this is something where I feel a lot of people get lost on. And the meditative arts are often referred to as the internal arts. And it's not an internal art when you're watching a video or you're listening to an audio. So for those of you out there that are practicing your ritual time and you're listening to an audio or watching a video, I recommend that go away. Now, that said, some of those apps and some videos are a great way to learn these practices. However, for your ritual time and your daily practice, you don't want to be listening to something exterior or watching a video, because it's meant to be that time where you self-reflect and you turn your focus inward. And so I feel like a lot of people are kind of using it as a crutch. And, I've met many of them, teaching these practices for so many years, is that, I'll hear somebody say, oh yeah, I've been meditating for 5 years, 10 years, and I listen to this app, and I ask them what their practice is like. Oh, I listen to this one and that one, and I alternate every day, or whatever it is for them. And that person, while they might get some relaxed states of mind and there might be some benefit to that, if somebody has a guide and they're following approach to learning how to cultivate these internal arts without that stuff as a crutch, in a very short amount of time will reach so many more benefits in their practice than somebody who's just following one of those.
It's almost like bowling. I brought this up the other day too, like the idea of bowling where you put the guardrails up to keep the gutters from being used. And then eventually you want to take those guardrails down because you want to show how good of a bowler you actually are, because you have to keep those gutters in mind, right? Like in some respect, it's, and to me, when you mentioned just what you mentioned now, the idea of, in productivity parlance, especially getting things done, the methodology that David Allen teaches is that you often hear people spend a lot of time polishing the runway. There's horizons of focus, right? So the polishing the runway is like those surface level tasks that basically you're feeling like you're getting stuff done, but you're not reaching those higher levels where there's grander intentions. There's further that you can go. I mean, if you're planes don't drive along the runway to get to your destination. They eventually get to 40,000 feet, which is what his idea behind the horizons of focus are. And so the term polishing the runway is a lot of people just checking off boxes for the sake of, hey, look how many boxes I checked off, as opposed to, yeah, but were they the right boxes? So I think that there's a definite connection there as well with what you just mentioned.
Yeah, I really like that analogy. That's right on.
Jeff, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today, especially on this live stream. So for those that are listening to the episode, we offered a live stream to members of my Time Crafting Trust community. We'll put a link to the show notes as to how to join that community if you'd like to be part of it. Jeff, before I let you go, where can people pick up the book? The book, by the way, is called The Yielding Warrior, Discovering the Secret Path to Unleashing Your True Potential. Where can people keep up the book and keep up with the work that you're doing?
So you could get a copy of The Yielding Warrior on Amazon. Also, if you go to my website, The Yielding Warrior, and go to /book, you could get a free copy of the book. Just pay for shipping and we'll send you out a copy. Also, if you're interested in this philosophy and you like kind of how I'm talking about building an evolving life practice with the meditative arts, at theyieldingwarrior.com, you could try out our online program for 2 weeks and kind of see what we're doing with that and learn how to start cultivating and building a life practice. And for those of you out there that might own a yoga studio or a martial arts studio, or maybe you're a life coach and you want to learn how to teach these arts, there's also a teacher training program on the side as well.
Jeff, thanks so much for taking the time to have a productive conversation with me today.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
All right, the actual podcast recording is done. For those that are here still live on the live stream, thank you for being here. Jordan, thanks for your question. Jordan Gloria Jean, thanks for chiming in as well. Yeah, this has been great. So we're going to end the live stream now. And Jeff's going to stick around behind it in the green room, the virtual green room as it is, so we can kind of just wrap things up individually. But again, don't forget, this episode is going to be for premium members only for the time being. The episode, when it drops, you'll be able to get the ad-free version, and we've got more live streams coming up this week, so I hope you'll join me. Thanks, Sarah, for handling the chat and facilitating questions. Janet, thank you for being here as well. Really appreciate it. And that's it for today. We'll see you on the next live stream. Take care, everybody.